The Jets lost their opener to the Pittsburgh Steelers, but week one proved something important. This Jets offense will score points. Locked On Jets begins now.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Tuesday, September 9th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday, and our episode today is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Well, it is overreaction week in the NFL. Every team has now played its first game, and people are drawing sweeping conclusions about how the 2025 season will play out based on the first game of the season. And of course, many of these takes that you'll hear this week are complete overreactions. On today's show, we're going to talk about some things we can take from week one from the Jets that are not overreactions. We'll talk about how the coaching staff needs to improve. We'll talk about why the defense is not as lost of a cause as it looked Sunday. And we're going to begin by talking about the Jets offense. The Jets offense had a very, very encouraging showing on Sunday. They put up 32 points. They only punted twice. It was the first time in over 3 decades that the Jets went an entire first half without punting in a game. It was everything you wanted in a debut for a new quarterback and a new offensive coordinator. Now, if you're sitting there today, based on and taking Justin Fields' performance and saying Justin Fields is now the future of the franchise, the Jets found their quarterback, that unfortunately would be an overreaction because we have seen Justin Fields play big games before. We saw it in Chicago. To a lesser extent, we saw it maybe a time or two in Pittsburgh. The question with Justin Fields has never been whether he can play a big game. The question with him has been whether he could stack big games over and over and avoid really bad games. That's something we will not know for at least a couple of weeks, if not for the full season. But I think that a lot of what the Jets did on Sunday against the Pittsburgh Steelers is going to be repeatable through the entire season. Now, that does not mean the Jets will play with the same level of efficiency. That does not mean the Jets are going to put up 32 points every week. It does not mean that they are going to avoid punting in the first half every week. In fact, the efficiency is almost certain to go down. I think that you had to be encouraged with what you saw from Justin Fields on Sunday. He's not going to play at that level all season long, though. And the reason I say that is because there's never been a quarterback in the history of the game who's played with Justin Fields' level of efficiency against Pittsburgh over the long haul. Tom Brady did not complete close to 10 yards per attempt. So either Justin Fields is going to be the GOAT quarterback by a wide margin, or he's not going to play quite as well going forward as he did on Sunday. That's probably like the high watermark we'll see from Fields, and it was quite good. That's not repeatable. But the formula the Jets used on Sunday, I think, is very repeatable. And it means that this Jets offense will put up points this year. And that may not sound like a big deal if you're a fan of one of the other 31 teams. If you don't root for the Jets and you decided to tune into this podcast, you may be saying, well, John, what's the big deal there? If you're a Jets fan, an offense that can put up points is something to be very excited about because we don't have many of those here in New York with the Jets and lately with the Giants also. But there's a clear formula here for the Jets to succeed in 2025, and it was on display Sunday. I think sometimes we view the quarterback as either the focal point, either the quarterback is responsible for all the success, or the rest of the offense is responsible for the quarterback's success or failure. So, a quarterback goes out and plays well, like Justin Fields did on Sunday. There's a tendency to say it was all Justin Fields. When a quarterback fails, we saw this over and over with Zach Wilson, with Sam Darnold, with Geno Smith, with Mark Sanchez. When the quarterback fails, there's a tendency to blame it all on the surroundings, as opposed to they didn't put good receivers around him, or the coaching's terrible. In reality, though, one drives the other. You need the quarterback to function at a high level, but you also need the rest of the parts to lift the quarterback up. And that's what you got on Sunday. In Justin Fields, you have a talented quarterback. You have a guy capable of high-end results, but it has to be in the right situation. He has to be supported. One of the things we discussed a lot over the course of the offseason is that Justin Fields is a guy who in the right circumstances, when things are working, can produce good results. If something's wrong, though, if he's not in a good situation, he will not produce good results. And there are quarterbacks you can plug into like really good situations who can't produce. So it's a situation where the quarterback has to make everybody else better, and everybody else has to lift the quarterback up. It's a relationship where one success in one area drives success in the other, and failure in one area drives failure in another. For the Jets, I think maybe the biggest part of their success on Sunday was not Justin Fields; it was the play of the offensive line, and particularly that right side of the offensive line. I don't know if you caught the stats. Armand Bembou pitched a shutout. Now, there were a lot of plays where he got help against TJ Watt, but there were also plays where he handled Watt on his own one-on-one and did the job. That was a super, super encouraging performance by Armand Bembou. On the other side, Olu Fashanu, he had a bit of a rough game. He had about 6 pressures he allowed. So, some statistical websites have compiled that, but he did produce pretty good results in the run game. And these 2 tackles are critical for the Jets. On the interior, it's not as good with AVT out, but you still have credible players. You have John Simpson, who maybe didn't have his best game Sunday, but still wasn't awful. Josh Myers, who's a credible starting center, and Joe Tippmann, who increasingly looks like he has found a home at guard. I'm really starting to think Joe Tippmann might be better served playing guard over the long run because it allows the Jets to utilize his ability to block one-on-one. The question mark has been these 2 tackles. And when I say question mark, that does not mean that the 2 tackles were necessarily destined to be bad. Far from it. The 2 tackles have tremendous upside. Fashanu was the 11th overall pick in 2024. Bembou was the 7th overall pick in 2025. These are guys who can both be excellent tackles in this league, but they're both young. They're both inexperienced. And as we know, sometimes young tackles struggle. The fact that Jets got that level of play out of the offensive line is critical because it means they'll be able to run the ball. And running the ball is an important part, first of all, of Fields' game, but it's also the type of thing that makes his job as a thrower easier, because if the Jets can run the ball effectively, defenses are going to have to drop that extra safety into the box. You drop that extra safety into the box, it makes it a lot easier to throw because it becomes a lot tougher to disguise your coverages when you're selling out against the run. It simplifies the passing game for Justin Fields, and we know Fields has plenty of ability as a runner. There was another component beyond the offensive line, though, and I go to the skill positions. One of the things we discussed during the offseason is that we had Garrett Wilson, and the question was who was behind Garrett Wilson. I think we knew Garrett was probably, as long as he stayed healthy, a lock to be very good. But there was not a lot behind him. Who would step up? Would it be the rookie Mason Taylor? Would it be maybe Braylon Allen taking a big step forward in year 2? I'll be honest with you, I was not ready for the performance Breece Hall had on Sunday. And I know it's one game, but he looked like a different player. It wasn't the results. Sometimes you can get into trouble with box score scouting. You can say, well, this guy had this many yards and this many carries. It was just as much about how Breece Hall did it. Because I saw a vision from Breece Hall that had been lacking in 2023 and 2024. I saw decisiveness from Breece Hall that had been lacking in 2023 and 2024. Too many times over the last 2 years, Breece would kind of dance in the backfield because he'd be waiting for the perfect hole to open. I started watching the film last night when it came out. I mean, Breece was seeing holes that I didn't see watching the film. I was like, how did he see that was going to open? There was just a different type of vision with Breece Hall. And if Breece gives the Jets that second high-end skill player, it's a big deal for this offense. It's less of a load that Justin Fields has to carry, and it's the type of thing that's really going to enhance this run game. Because we saw, Fields can outrun anybody. You get Fields in the zone read, he's good for 4 or 5 yards because, even if the edge guy has it covered, he'll just run past him. He'll beat the edge guy to the corner. And that's going to make this Jets offense very diverse, very difficult to defend. So it's an overreaction to say the Jets found their quarterback in Justin Fields based on Sunday's performance. It was a great performance. We got to see more out of it. And I don't think we'll know whether Justin Fields is even going to be the quarterback for 2026 until the end of the season. That we have a long way to go there. Justin Fields has a long way to develop. He's got a lot to show us. But I think that the offense we saw on Sunday, it's not an overreaction to say this offense is going to put up points. And for the New York Jets, that's the type of thing that's going to keep them a competitive football team. Now, it wasn't good on the other side of the ball Sunday, of course. Ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk Jets defense. A lot of people very down on this Jets defense, and you should be. But I think that there are a couple silver linings that suggest that this defense is going to improve as the season progresses, and we'll talk about what they are as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Supply House. When the opening whistle blows on a new repair, get your crew moving forward with Supply House. Order today and see parts on your doorstep tomorrow with over 280,000 plumbing, HVAC, and electrical equipments from the most trusted brands in the business. Their real-time inventory and honest lead times keep you from punting projects, while their industry-leading customer service always has your blind side covered. Need parts fast for a project? Supply House has next-day delivery. Talk about a game changer. The part finder tools and 3D schematics can save you hours on job where every detail matters. Join the free Trademaster program today and score serious perks like priority shipping, lower prices, and a dedicated support line. Visit supplyhouse.com to sign up for free and use promo code SHNFL5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Real people, real service. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is also brought to you by Game Time. NFL season is back, and honestly, there's nothing better than being in the stadium surrounded by fans cheering on your team. But let's be honest, getting tickets can be a hassle. Between queues, login screens, and prices jumping at checkout, it's frustrating. And that's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to fans. Game Time is fast, easy, and backed by the Game Time guarantee. You'll always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. Plus, all fees are included, so the price you see is the price you pay. I've used Game Time myself on numerous occasions. You can check it out if you want to head out to MetLife Stadium this Sunday for the Jets to take on the Buffalo Bills. You know what I like? They give you the view from your seat. You get a picture of what it's going to look like from your seat, so there's no surprises when you arrive. There's no obstructed view that you weren't expecting. That's why Game Time is the best. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. It is overreaction week in the NFL. We have our first game of the regular season. We've waited 9 months for this first game of the regular season. So naturally, everyone's going to read way too much into what happened. So on today's show, we're trying to separate fact from fiction. What's an overreaction? What's not an overreaction? I think it would be an overreaction to say the Jets defense is doomed based on what happened Sunday against the Pittsburgh Steelers. It was a hideous performance. 34 points allowed. Now, I know that one touchdown was set up by a short field on the Xavier Gipson fumble off the kickoff in the second half, but nobody's going to defend that defensive performance. It was a truly, truly dreadful outing by the New York Jets. And I think that the culprits were pretty clear. It was pretty much everybody in the secondary other than Sauce Gardner. Sauce Gardner had an excellent day, mostly following DK Metcalf around, which was an interesting development. Sauce pretty much traveled with DK, which is something he had not done under Robert Saleh and Jeff Ulbrich. And it was not really, that's not really a technique Aaron Glenn used a lot in Detroit, having his number one corner follow the other team's number one receiver around. But if you got a guy like Sauce Gardner and you're paying him $30.1 million per year on a new contract, that's how you should use him. He's a weapon, so use him to eliminate the other team's best target. Unfortunately, Sauce's teammates in the secondary did not do such a great job. Brandon Stevens had an awful game. Michael Carter II had an awful game. Tony Adams had an awful game. And Andre Cisco had a bad game. Maybe it wasn't as bad as the other three, but Cisco was responsible for a couple of bad angles, and there was a touchdown where he did not get off a block, where he had a chance to make a tackle. It was not good from the secondary. I thought Jamie Sherwood had a few hookups as well, but that secondary's got to fix things. I think that some of what's wrong in the secondary can be fixed, because a lot of the Jets' issues just came from guys busting very basic coverages. Sometimes like a defensive coordinator gets a little too cute, especially week one, and he builds in these like super complex coverages with all these rules that when you pass a guy off. I got to say, from my film study so far, it's looked a lot like the Jets just blew basic zone coverages. Or in the case of the first touchdown they allowed, Michael Carter II just thought they were running a different play, because the first Pittsburgh touchdown, the Jets didn't even cover the receiver who was running the route that scored the touchdown. It looked like it was Carter's guy, and Carter just like did his zone drop. He just dropped into zone coverage. He didn't realize that they were in man coverage, so maybe they communicated the play incorrectly. Stevens had a couple busts where he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. There was another big play where Carter did not get a good zone drop. These are basic things. And frankly, they should not happen week one, but they should be easy enough to clean up. Now, I do think that there are some issues with the Jets in the secondary. So I don't think it's an overreaction to say it's time to be a little concerned about some of the personnel in the secondary. I think a lot of the egregious stuff should not continue, because these are NFL players. They should understand how not to bust zone coverages. The busts were not the only issue, though. Some of it was just the play of the players. And I think, the number 2 corner Stevens and the slot corner Carter, they got beat too often, especially Stevens. I questioned the signing of Stevens at the time. I did not think he was a great player in Baltimore, and I thought the money the Jets gave him put a lot of risk on the Jets. They paid him like a quality starting corner, which he's not been to this point in his career. There's another issue with Stevens, though. I'm a big believer that if you have a dominant number 1 corner, if you have the type of corner like Sauce Gardner, who is going to make quarterbacks think twice about going in his direction, that means the other corner is going to get a lot of balls thrown his way. And that means an attribute you really got to look for in a number 2 corner are ball skills. And Stevens' biggest weakness is playing the ball in the air. And we saw it was the case of Baltimore. We saw it on Sunday where there were a couple of times he was in decent position, but he didn't turn his head to the ball or make a play on it. It reminded me a bit of a guy the Jets had during the Todd Bowles, Adam Gase eras, Darrell Roberts, who frequently was right next to the receiver while catching the ball, but missed an opportunity to make a play on it. That's not the type of thing you need from Stevens. Carter, had a bad year last year. We all blamed it on the injuries. He did not look good again on Sunday. And then the safety duo, Andre Cisco, I praised him, and which immediately is a sign of trouble because whenever I praise the Jets for bringing in a veteran safety, he plays poorly. It was not a good game for Cisco. But Tony Adams, 3 missed tackles. You can't have missed tackles from your safety position. And it started on the first Pittsburgh drive. Jets had a chance to get the Steelers off the field. Adams versus DK Metcalf, 1-on-1 on the open field on a 3rd down. Adams makes the tackle. The Steelers are punting. Adams misses the tackle. And there's also the way you miss the tackle. If Adams misses the tackle but forces Metcalf back inside, Jamie Sherwood might be there to clean up the tackle. He missed and let Metcalf break outside. That's just not something that you can have. So now there are questions, should the Jets have benchings? I think putting Xavier Thomas in for Brandon Stevens is an overreaction. And I don't say this because I have any particular love for Stevens, but people frequently say in situations like this, how could it get any worse? Well, frequently, if you're going with a rookie who's very raw, it will be worse than the veteran who's struggling. Because the veteran at least has some tools at his disposal. And there were some plays where Stevens covered effectively. Not a lot, but there were some. I think a veteran as raw as Thomas would really, really struggle out there. I don't think it's an overreaction, though, to say let's give Malachi Moore a shot over Tony Adams, because while it was preseason, we saw Moore play in the exhibition season, and it seemed like he knew where to be. It seemed like he was playing really solid football. He seemed like he was not in over his head. In fact, I'd even say against backups, he looked like the best player on the field. And if you're going to succeed against starters as a rookie and we're basing it on preseason reps against backups, you need to look like the best player on the field, because you play against better competition. You're not going to look like the best player on the field, but you may look like a credible player. I think it is time to look at benching Tony Adams for Malachi Moore. I don't think that that's an overreaction. So a bit of a, interesting situation here with the Jets. I think that there are some things on the defense to be worried about. I think there are some things that should not be that hard to clean up. I would expect, even though I don't think much of Brandon Stevens, I think he will not bust as many coverages going forward because, he's an NFL player and these were pretty basic coverages they were busting. I think the same of Michael Carter II. I worry about Stevens in coverage. I don't have a lot of faith in these safeties right now. I think the Jets should make a change at the safety position. So, heading into week 2, I don't think everything about the defense should lead to panic. I do think that there are some things the Jets need to clean up, though, and I think there are some things the Jets need to fix. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about this Jets coaching staff. Despite the loss, lots of good vibes about the job Aaron Glenn and Tanner Engstrand did. But I'm not sure that people are really grading their performance on the whole. I think that there are things Glenn and Engstrand did poorly that need to be fixed and will lead to future losses if they are not fixed. We'll talk about what they are as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season has arrived, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. And FanDuel fits however you like to bet. Player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little bit more energy to Sundays. And looking ahead to this Sunday, Jets 7-point home underdogs to the Buffalo Bills on FanDuel. This game has an over-under of 45.5 points. So not a lot of love for the Jets on FanDuel, but if you want to get in on the action, download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Tuesday. It is overreaction week in the NFL, so we're taking a look at Jets week 1, the loss to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and figuring out what takeaways from this game are an overreaction and which ones are not. Now, despite the loss, there has been a lot of love I've heard online for the Jets coaching staff in the aftermath of their 34-32 loss to the Pittsburgh Steelers. I've heard people say the Jets finally have a good coaching staff. I hate to say it, but I think at this point, that is an overreaction. First of all, because these guys have only coached one game and, they lost the game. But I think there's a few things that cut a little deeper here. I was thinking about this over last night, and lots of talk, again, lots and lots of talk about, this coaching staff looks so much better. And if Robert Saleh's coaching, if a team coached by Robert Saleh had blown a 9-point lead in the fourth quarter, if a team coached by Robert Saleh had constant breakdowns in the secondary, if a team coached by Robert Saleh had 7 penalties for 74 yards, I don't think the reception from the Jets fan base would be very good. I think that all of these things would be used as proof that the coaching staff was struggling. Now, I don't think Aaron Glenn should be held after one game to the same standard Robert Saleh was after 3 years and change. This is game 1 of trying to implement a new program here in New York. He's trying to, turn this thing around after not just 2 years of losing with Aaron Rodgers, but 14 years where the franchise has been kind of lost at sea. It's going to take time, and things will not be solved all at once. I'm not even going to say that I'm going to criticize Aaron Glenn right now, because things happen during a game. The question is, how will these things be corrected? Because, Aaron Glenn has gotten a lot of love for, talking about how mistakes are unacceptable. And he's gotten a lot of love for saying we have to be disciplined. Well, it's one thing to say we've got to be disciplined. It's another thing to be disciplined. What we saw on Sunday from the Jets was not a disciplined team. Lots of big mistakes in key spots, including a play that I don't think has gotten enough attention. It came in the third quarter where the Jets were up 9. The defense was rolling. Steelers had 2 back-to-back punts to start the second half. Jets had taken a 2-score lead. They get a stop for a negative 2-yard play on first down. So now the Steelers are behind the sticks, and it feels like we're on the verge of the Jets landing a knockout blow here. Quincy Williams commits a really dumb undisciplined penalty, and this is a guy who's supposed to be one of the stars. But we saw signs of a lack of discipline over and over. I talked in the last segment about all of the times when the Jets, busted coverages, just basic things where guys are not communicating on the back end of the defense. And I can even go to the offensive side of the ball. And I know Tanner Engstrand is a very popular guy after week 1. There were things I liked that Engstrand did. I think, first of all, he did not abandon the run when it was working. I think you see a lot of offensive coordinators do that in this league, where the run's working and then they just get away from it and he never comes back. Engstrand stuck with the run when it was working. That was a positive. I think the plays the Jets run are very well designed. These are plays that put stress on the defense. That was one of my key phrases during the Nathaniel Hackett era was play design that puts stress on the defense, because we had none of it. There was no motion. The route combinations were not, anything that forced defenses to think. They didn't force defenses to switch or communicate. That's different under Engstrand. Lots of good design there. And I thought the 4th down touchdown the Jets scored on the goal line in the fourth quarter, fantastic play call. It was a risky call, because if the Steelers don't sell out completely against the run, it's not going to work. But there was every reason to think, based on the Jets' run offense, based on the success they had that day, based on the Jets' identity as a team that wants to play physical smash mouth football, there was a very good chance the Steelers were going to sell out against the middle, and Fields would walk into the end zone on a fake as he busted outside. And that's exactly what happened. But I also thought there were some situations where the play calling was not great. I questioned the play calling a bit on the drive the Jets had. They got the ball back up 1 late in the fourth quarter, around 5 minutes left, and they went 3 and out. I felt in that situation there were some play calls that were a bit suspect. I also wonder where the tush push was, because the Jets were one of the teams that voted against banning that. This offseason, there was a movement in the NFL to get rid of the tush push, and it really relates to the Eagles, because the Eagles have used it to such great effect. With a quarterback like Justin Fields, not only a mobile guy, but a big guy, a strong guy, that play is going to be virtually unstoppable. And the Jets did not use it. They did not use it once. They did not use it in short yardage situations. The one that really baffled me was when they went for 2 after the penalty, on the missed extra point by Nick Folk. I didn't understand why they wouldn't use it there, because that's like from 1 yard out. That's like the point where it's tailor made to use it, and it's almost certainly going to work. I'd say after one game, I'm not going to draw sweeping conclusions on the coaching staff. We all want this coaching staff to be good. I think the question is not so much, whether things went wrong, because we've just laid out what went wrong. We know things went wrong. The question is what they will do to fix it going forward. Now, one of the biggest things that needs to be done this week is Xavier Gipson needs to be cut, because Xavier Gipson had a critical fumble, and Xavier Gipson has never been a guy who's protecting the football. It's odd to me that the Jets cut Jamal Pritchett, not from the standpoint that their explanation made no sense. Their explanation made sense. They suggested that Pritchett, had some ball security issues as a return guy when they were developing, who was going to be the return guy this offseason. The issue is that you gave the job to Xavier Gipson, the guy who has had massive ball security issues in his own right during his two plus years in the league. So if ball security is an issue, and it should be one, especially when you're talking return guys, you have to have a guy who actually takes care of the football. Xavier Gipson's never done that. He put the ball on the ground twice on Sunday. Not just the fumble that the Steelers recovered, but he actually broke a big return, was not touched down, and just put the ball on the ground, and got lucky that Marcelino McCrary-Ball fell on it. When Marcelino McCrary-Ball was very alert and fell on the football. So that's number one. Number two is they've got to get these coverages straightened out. There were too many busts. Too many times guys weren't communicating. These are things that need to be hammered out in practice. And I think the offense played well on Sunday. I think that there's a tendency to say that the offense, whenever the offense plays well, it's because the play calling was good, and whenever the offense played poorly, it's because the play calling was bad. I didn't think the play calling was egregiously bad, but I think Engstrand's getting a little bit too much credit because his offensive line blocked. I thought there were certain situations where the play calling in key moments was a tad head scratching. And I think that that's something that's got to be worked out, because even though the Jets succeeded, it was more about execution than it was necessarily the play calling being right. So when I say all of this, I'm not suggesting that, the coaching staff is doomed. I'm just saying I think people are going a little bit overboard with the praise, given the stuff the Jets need to clean up. I'll praise the coaching staff when the stuff's cleaned up, and it can start to be cleaned up this week against Buffalo. But that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoyed the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Tuesday, everybody, and send in your mailbag questions. Tomorrow we will have our weekly mailbag.